The great hall of Nexus Prime stretched for miles under a dome of pure crystal. 12 different species sat around the massive council table, each representing worlds that had known peace for thousands of years. The air shimmered with translation. Fields, allowing beings of light, metal, and flesh to speak as one. Dr. Elena Vasquez stood in the center of the hall, her small human form dwarfed by the alien representatives around her. She had traveled across the galaxy to be here, carrying the hopes of 8 billion humans on her shoulders. Her hands shook slightly as she looked up at the council overseer, a tall being with silver skin and eyes that glowed like stars. Honored Council, Elena began, her voice steady despite her fear. Humanity asks only for a chance to prove ourselves worthy of galactic society. We have much to offer. The overseer Veltar of the Zephyrian race leaned forward. His people could read minds, and Elena felt his thoughts brush against hers like cold fingers. Dr. Vasquez, your species has been observed for 50 years. We have seen your wars, your conflicts, your refusal to follow peaceful guidelines. Around the table, other council members nodded in agreement. The mechanoids, beings of living metal, clicked their approval. The luminari, creatures of pure energy, pulsed with agreement. The aquatic depths dwellers bubbled in their water spheres. While the plant-like Verdani rustled their leaves, Elena's heart sank, but she pressed on. Yes, we have conflicts, but we also have incredible creativity. We solve problems others cannot. When the mining colony on Kepler 442 faced that crystal plague, human engineers found a solution in 3 days. Your best scientists had worked for months. By ignoring safety protocols and using dangerous methods, snapped Admiral Cassara of the Mechanoids. Her metal face showed no emotion, but her voice carried disapproval. Your people refuse to follow established procedures. They act without consulting proper authorities. Because sometimes rules need to be broken to save lives, Elena replied, her voice growing stronger. That's what humans do. We adapt, we survive, we find ways when others see only walls. The council exchanged glances. Through their various forms of communication, Elena could sense their discussion even though she couldn't understand it. The Zephyrians shared thoughts directly. The mechanoids transmitted data through their metal bodies. The energy beings flickered in patterns of light. Finally, Veltar spoke again. Dr. Vasquez, the galaxy has enjoyed 12,000 years of peace. No wars, no conflicts between species. We share resources fairly. We solve disputes through discussion. We have built a perfect society. But perfection can become a prison. Elena said desperately, what happens when something threatens your perfect world? Something that cannot be reasoned with or shared with? Such things do not exist, replied Counselor Threndi, another Zephyrian. Peace is maintained through understanding and cooperation. Your species brings only chaos. Elena felt tears forming in her eyes. Please, give us a chance. Let us prove that different doesn't mean dangerous. The council deliberated for hours. Elena was made to wait in a small chamber while the most powerful beings in the galaxy decided humanity's fate. She stared out the window at the perfect city below. Flying vehicles moved in orderly patterns. Citizens of different species walked together peacefully. Gardens bloomed with plants from 100 worlds. It was beautiful, but Elena saw something else. Everything was controlled, predictable, safe. There was no room for the unexpected, the wild, the brilliantly chaotic spark that made humans special. When she was called back, Valtara's face showed no emotion. The council has reached a decision. Humanity will be quarantined to your home system. A barrier will be constructed around your sun to prevent travel beyond. Elena's knees nearly gave out. You're imprisoning an entire species. We are protecting the galaxy, Veltar replied. Your people refuse to follow our guidelines. You establish unauthorized colonies. You develop weapons instead of art. You fight instead of discuss. The galaxy does not need such chaos. What if you're wrong? Elena whispered. What if someday the galaxy needs us? That day will never come, Threndi said with certainty. We have built something perfect here. Order, peace, prosperity for all. Chaos serves no purpose in such a world. The construction of the barrier began immediately. Ships from all 12 species gathered around the Sol system. Elena watched from her vessel as they worked together, their combined technologies creating something humanity had never seen before. Massive generators appeared at the edge of the solar system, each one the size of a moon. Energy fields sprang up between them, forming a wall that nothing could pass. The barrier shimmered like water, beautiful and terrible. Captain Marcus Chun, Elena's escort, stood beside her at the observation window. Dr. Vasquez, we have to go. The barrier will be complete in 6 hours. Elena pressed her hand against the glass. They're making a mistake, Marcus. I can feel it. Someday they'll need what only humans can provide. Maybe, Marcus said quietly. But by then, will we still be willing to help them? As their ship passed through the barrier for the last time, Elena felt something close behind them, like a door slamming shut. Earth appeared ahead, blue and beautiful and suddenly very small. 8 billion humans were now cut off from the galaxy. Trapped in their own system like animals in a cage, on Nexus Prime the Council celebrated their decision. The galaxy was safe from human chaos. Their perfect order would continue forever. They had solved a problem before it could grow dangerous, but in the depths of space, far beyond their sensors, something else watched the barrier's completion with interest. Ancient eyes, older than the galaxy itself, saw the humans trapped within their prison. It had been traveling toward this galaxy for millions of years, consuming everything in its path. The entity that would later be called the Devourer had destroyed countless civilizations. It fed on order, on peace, on the predictable patterns. That made civilizations easy to consume. It had never encountered true chaos, never faced a species that thrived on conflict and adapted to any challenge. As the barrier sealed around humanity, the Devourer increased its speed. The galaxy looked ripe for feeding. All those ordered worlds, all those peaceful species following their careful patterns. It would be a feast unlike any other. The irony was lost on the Council as they returned to their perfect worlds. They had removed the one element that might have saved them. In trying to preserve their order, they had made themselves defenseless against something that fed on order itself. Years would pass before they understood their mistake. Years of growth, innovation, and desperate creativity would transform humanity in ways the Council could never imagine. The cage they had built to contain human chaos would become the forge that turned chaos into salvation. But for now, the galaxy celebrated its victory over disorder. The humans were contained, the peace was preserved, and the future looked bright and perfectly predictable. They had no idea what was coming for them in the dark. The alarm bells rang across the research station as Captain Marcus Chun pulled his ship away from the barrier. 50 years had passed since the galaxy locked humanity away, and Marcus had spent most of those years testing the prison walls. His ship, the Defiance, looked nothing like the vessels that had once carried humans to the stars. Sleek and angular, it bent space around itself using technology the galaxy had never seen. Marcus watched the barrier ripple as his probe bounced off it once again. "Still holding, Captain," reported his engineer, a young woman named Lisa Park. "But the quantum readings are interesting." "The barrier isn't as stable as it was 10 years ago," Marcus nodded. "That was good news, but not the kind they needed right now." He opened a communication channel to Earth. "Control, this is Defiance. Barrier test complete. No breakthrough today." "Understood, Marcus," came the reply from his sister Anna, now president of the United Earth government. "How are the deep space sensors looking?" Marcus checked his instruments and frowned. "The shadow is still approaching. Distance ... roughly 40 light-years from galactic edge. Speed is increasing." On Earth, Anna Chun sat in the command center that had been built beneath the Rocky Mountains. Around her, screens showed the positions of hundreds of human ships, all working on the same impossible task, finding a way out of their prison before something terrible reached the galaxy. Dr. Sarah Kim, now head of all human research projects, stood beside Anna's chair. Her hair had gone gray during the long years of isolation, but her mind was sharper than ever. The shadow entity is definitely artificial, she said, pointing to the sensor data. It's consuming everything in its path. Entire star systems just ... And we're the only ones who can see it, Anna said bitterly. Our long-range sensors are better than anything the galaxy had when they locked us up. We've tried to warn them, but the barrier blocks our signals, Sarah nodded. They think we're lying to try to break free. They can't imagine that they're perfect. Galaxy might actually need our help. Anna stood and walked to the main display. It showed the Sol system, ringed by the energy barrier that had contained humanity for half a century. But it also showed something the Council could never have imagined. A civilization transformed by necessity. Massive shipyards orbited every planet. The asteroid belt had been turned into a network of research stations and manufacturing centers. Mars was covered with domed cities where millions of humans worked on projects that pushed the boundaries of science. The barrier had been meant to cage them. The humans had turned it into a laboratory. Cut off from galactic trade and resources, they had been forced to innovate or die. They chose to innovate beyond anything they had thought possible. Show me Project Prometheus, Anna said. The screen changed to show a massive structure hidden. In the asteroid belt, Dr. Kim smiled with pride as she explained what they were seeing. We took apart every piece of alien technology we had before the quarantine, studied it, improved it, made it better. The quantum drive system alone is 50 times more efficient than anything the mechanoids ever built. The Project Prometheus facility was a marvel of human engineering. Inside its protective shell, thousands of scientists worked on technologies that the peaceful galaxy had never needed to develop. Weapons that could bend reality itself. Shields that existed in multiple dimensions. Ships that could phase in and out of normal space. Captain Marcus Chun landed at the facility and walked through corridors humming with energy. The air itself seemed to vibrate with barely contained power. He found Dr. Kim in her laboratory, working on something that made his eyes water to look at directly. "What is that?" he asked, squinting at the device on her workbench. "Dimensional anchor," Sarah replied, not looking up from her work. "If we're right about the shadow entity, it probably exists partially outside normal space. This would lock it into our reality where we can fight it." Marcus was impressed despite himself. 50 years ago, we could barely build ships that didn't explode half the time. Now you're talking about wrestling things from other dimensions. Sarah finally looked up, and Marcus saw something in her eyes that made him step back. It was the look of someone who had spent decades preparing for war. Being caged teaches you things, Marcus. It teaches you that safety is an illusion. That peace is something you have to fight for. The galaxy forgot that lesson. We never had the chance to. Across the solar system, similar scenes played out. On Luna, massive factories produced materials that didn't exist naturally anywhere in the universe. On Europa, teams of engineers tested ships that could travel faster than the peaceful galaxy thought possible. On Titan, weapons were built that could crack planets, but the most important development was happening on Earth itself. In schools and universities, human children learned not just science and mathematics, but something the galaxy had lost: how to think like predators and survivors. Young Maria Santos stood in her academy classroom, looking at a holographic display of the galactic map. Her teacher, a veteran of the early barrier tests, pointed to the council worlds. "They have perfect order," he explained. "Every ship follows traffic patterns. Every citizen has an assigned role. Every problem has an established solution. It works beautifully when everything goes according to plan." Maria raised her hand. "But what happens when something doesn't follow their plan?" The teacher smiled grimly. "That's exactly the right question, Maria. They don't know how to handle chaos. They've never had to. That's why they feared us, and that's why they'll need us." Meanwhile, on the outer edge of the galaxy, the first scout ships of the Council finally detected what human sensors had been tracking for years. The readings made no sense to them. Entire solar systems were simply missing from their charts. Where there should have been stars and planets, there was only empty space. Admiral Cassara of the Mechanoids studied the reports with growing confusion. Her logical mind could not process what she was seeing. This is impossible. Matter cannot simply cease to exist. Her science officer, a young mechanoid named 07, checked the readings again. Admiral, the data is confirmed. The Outer Rim territories are ... 17 systems in the past month. No debris, no energy signatures, no trace they ever existed. Kesara felt something she had never experienced before: fear. The mechanoids had built their entire civilization on the principle that everything could be understood, predicted, controlled. This defied everything they knew about the universe. Back in the Sol system, human sensors watched the approaching darkness with grim determination. The shadow entity was less than 20 light-years from the galaxy's edge now. Soon, the Council would discover what humanity had been trying to warn them about. Anaishan stood on the observation deck of the command center, looking up at the stars beyond the barrier. Somewhere out there, the galaxy that had rejected them was about to face something it couldn't understand or fight, something that fed on order and predictability. 50 years, she whispered to herself. 50 years of isolation, innovation, and desperation. They wanted to cage the chaos. Instead, they forged it into a weapon. Dr. Kim joined her at the window. The entity will reach the galaxy within a year. When it does, their perfect order won't be enough to stop it, Anna nodded. Then they'll have to choose. Admit they were wrong and ask for our help, or watch their perfect civilization be devoured by something they can't comprehend. The irony was bitter but fitting. The galaxy had cast out humanity to preserve their peace. Now, only the chaos they had rejected could save them from destruction. In the darkness between stars, the Devourer sensed the organized patterns of galactic civilization ahead. It hungered for the ordered minds, the predictable behavior, the peaceful compliance that made feeding so easy. It had no concept of chaos, no understanding of unpredictability. It never encountered humans. The first attack happened without warning. The peaceful farming world of Ilthera Prime simply stopped responding to communications. One moment, the planet was sending routine reports about their harvest festivals. The next moment, there was nothing but silence. Commander Defal of the Ilthran Defense Fleet arrived at his homeworld 3 days later. What he found made him question his sanity. Ilthera Prime still existed, still orbited its star, but it was completely empty. The city stood untouched, but there were no people, no animals, no plants. Even the bacteria in the soil was gone. Scan for life signs, Zephyl ordered his crew, though he already knew what they would find. Nothing, Commander, replied his science officer. No biological readings anywhere on the planet. It's as if every living thing just ... disappeared. Zephyl landed a team on the surface. They walked through empty streets where the lights still worked and the air still circulated. Food sat half-eaten on tables. Children's toys lay scattered. And playgrounds. But there were no bodies, no signs of struggle, no indication of what had happened to 8 billion Iltherans. The only clue was a strange darkness that seemed to cling to the edges of buildings and hover in shadowy corners. When the team tried to scan it, their instruments went dead. When they tried to collect samples, the darkness simply moved away like smoke. Within hours, 3 more worlds went silent. Then 7, then 20. The outer rim of the galaxy was being consumed by something that left no trace except empty planets and that strange, creeping darkness. On Nexus Prime, the Council gathered in emergency session. Overseer Veltar S.'s usually calm face showed cracks of stress as reports poured in from across the galaxy. How many worlds have we lost contact with? He asked. 43 systems in the past week, reported Admiral Kesara. Whatever is doing. This is moving faster than our ships can respond. By the time we reach a system, it's already empty. Counselor Threndy leaned forward. His telepathic abilities stretched to their limit as he tried to make sense of the crisis. I cannot sense any minds in the affected areas. It's not that the people are dead or hiding, they're simply not there anymore. The assembled species around the table exchanged worried glances. The mechanoids ran calculations on their internal Computers, the luminari pulsed with anxious light. The plant-like Verdani rustled their leaves in distress. None of them had ever faced anything like this before. What about the humans? Asked someone from the back of the chamber. It was a young aquatic depths representative named Flower. Their long-range sensors were always better than ours. Do they know anything about this? The question hung in the air like a forbidden thought. For 50 years, the Council had ignored every signal from the Sol system. The barrier blocked most human communications, but occasionally something got through. Usually warnings about something approaching from deep space. Veltar's expression darkened. The humans are contained for good reason. This crisis does not change that fact, but even as he spoke, more reports arrived. 50 systems, 60. The darkness was moving through the outer rim like a wildfire, consuming everything in its path. And it was accelerating toward the core worlds where the Council species lived. Admiral Kesara made the decision to face the threat directly. She assembled the largest fleet in galactic history, 3,000 ships from 7 different species, armed with the most advanced weapons the peaceful galaxy had ever built. Energy cannons that could melt planets, gravity bombs that could collapse stars, shield generators that could protect entire fleets. The fleet intercepted the darkness at the edge of the Kepler sector. What they found defied every law of physics. They understood. The entities that emerged from the darkness were not ships or machines. They were something far worse. Massive forms that seemed to exist partially in normal space and partially somewhere else. They moved through solid matter like it was empty air. They absorbed energy weapons like sponges absorbing water. All ships, open fire. Kesara commanded from her flagship. The combined firepower of the galactic fleet lit up space like a newborn. Energy beams that could destroy asteroids struck the dark entities and simply disappeared. Missiles that could level cities passed through the creatures without effect. The weapons that had kept peace for thousands of years were completely useless. Then the entities began to feed. Kesara watched in horror as her ships began to dim. The lights flickered and went out, the engines stopped working. The life support systems failed. But worse than the technical failures was what happened to the crews. Through the communication channels, she heard her people calling out in confusion and terror. Their voices became hollow, distant, as if they were speaking from very far away. Then, one by one, the voices stopped. Not because the people died, but because they simply ceased to exist. Admiral, her science officer called out, his voice filled with panic. The entities are draining something from our ships. Not energy, not matter, something else, something fundamental. Kesara realized with growing horror what was being taken. Life force, consciousness, the very essence of what made living beings alive. The entities were feeding on existence itself, leaving behind empty shells of matter that had once been. Ships and people, all ships retreat, she ordered. Fall back to the inner systems. But it was too late for most of the fleet. Only a few hundred ships escaped the Kepler sector. Behind them, the darkness consumed everything else and continued its advance toward the galactic core. The surviving ships limped back to Nexus Prime, carrying news that shattered the Council's understanding of the universe. These were not pirates, or invaders that could be negotiated with. This was something that existed to consume, to feed, to turn the living universe into empty void. Our weapons are useless, Admiral Kesara reported to the emergency session. Our shields provide no protection. These entities exist partially outside normal space. They drain the life from everything they touch. Overseer Veltar felt something he had never experienced in his 1,000-year life: despair. What do our scientists recommend? They have no recommendations, Kesara replied. Nothing in our databases even describes what we're facing. It's as if the universe itself is being unraveled by something that shouldn't exist. In the gallery above the council chamber, Ambassador Threndi watched the proceedings with growing dread. He remembered the human ambassador, Dr. Vasquez, and her final words before the barrier was built. What if someday the galaxy needs us? The thought was treasonous, unthinkable. But as more reports came in of systems going dark, Threndy found himself wondering if the humans had seen this coming. Their warnings from behind the barrier had mentioned something approaching from deep space. Something dangerous. Another messenger burst into the chamber. Honored Council, the entities have reached the Middle Rim. The crystalline worlds are under attack. The botanical gardens of serenity have gone silent. The darkness was consuming the galaxy's most beautiful and peaceful worlds. Places where art and music had flourished for millennia were being turned into empty husks. The perfect order that the Council had spent thousands of years building was being devoured by something that fed on order itself. Veltar looked around the chamber at the faces of his fellow council members. For the first time in galactic history, the representatives of 12 species were united by the same emotion: terror. "How long before it reaches the core worlds?" he asked quietly. "At current speed, 6 months," Kasara replied. "Maybe less." If it continues to accelerate, the chamber fell silent. Everyone understood what that meant. In 6 months, Nexus Prime itself would be consumed. The capital of galactic civilization would become another empty planet floating in space. "There must be something we can do," whispered the Luminari representative, her energy form flickering with distress. "Some weapon we haven't tried, some technology we haven't developed." But they all knew the truth. Their peaceful civilization had never needed to develop weapons against the impossible. They had built their entire society on the principle that everything could be understood and controlled through reason and cooperation. The entities destroying their galaxy were neither reasonable nor cooperative. They were chaos given form, unpredictability made manifest. Everything the Council had spent 50 years protecting themselves from in the form of humanity. In the Sol system, human sensors tracked the approaching darkness with grim satisfaction. Dr. Sarah Kim stood in her laboratory, watching the tactical displays that showed the entity's path through the galaxy. "They're learning," she told President Anna Chun over the communication link. "Each attack teaches them more about galactic technology. They're adapting faster than the Council can respond." Anna nodded from her command center on Earth. "How much time do we have before they ask for our help?" "Soon," Sarah replied. "Their perfect order is being consumed by something that exists in chaos. When they finally understand what they're facing, they'll realize they need the one thing they tried to eliminate from the galaxy." "Us," Anna said. "Us," Sarah confirmed. "The question is, will we help them?" Anna looked out at the barrier that had imprisoned humanity for 50 years. Beyond it, the galaxy that had rejected them was being devoured by something they couldn't fight or understand. The ship that approached the Sol barrier was small and alone. Ambassador Threndy sat in the pilot's seat of Redemption's Call, his hands shaking as he stared at the energy wall that had contained humanity for 50 years. Behind him, the galaxy was dying. Ahead of him lay the species he had helped condemn. "This is Ambassador Threndy of the Galactic Council," he broadcast toward the barrier. I beg for an audience with human leadership." For long minutes, there was no response. Threndy wondered if the humans would simply leave him to die at their prison door. It would be fitting justice for what the Council had done to them. Then something impossible happened. The barrier began to part. Threndy watched in amazement as a section of the energy wall opened like a door. The technology to do that should not have existed. The barrier had been built using the combined science of 12 species. No single race should have been able to control it. But humans, it seemed, had learned to do more than just probe their cage. They had learned to open it. A voice came over his communication system, speaking in perfect Zephyrian. "Ambassador Threndy, you're cleared to enter Sol space. Please follow the navigation beacon to Earth." The voice belonged to President Anna Chun, though Threndy did not know her name yet. As his ship passed through the barrier, he saw the beacon appear on his instruments. But he also saw something else that made him gasp in shock. The Sol system was completely transformed. Where 50 years ago there had been 9 planets and scattered asteroids, now there was a vast network of stations, shipyards, and defensive platforms. Massive structures orbited every world, connected by streams of traffic that moved in patterns too complex for his mind to follow. Ships surrounded his vessel as he flew toward Earth, but these were not the crude human vessels he remembered from before the quarantine. These ships were sleek and powerful, their hulls seeming to bend light around them. They moved with a grace that suggested technology far beyond what the galaxy had achieved. "Ambassador," came the voice again, "welcome to Earth." Threndy landed at a spaceport that rivaled anything on Nexus Prime. As he stepped out of his ship, he was greeted by a woman in her 60s with graying hair and eyes that held 50 years of carefully controlled anger. "I am President Anna Chun," she said. "We need to talk." The journey to the human capital took Threndy through a world he could barely recognize. The chaotic, polluted planet he remembered had been transformed into something that made the council. Worlds looked primitive by comparison. Cities of glass and metal stretched toward the sky, connected by transport tubes that moved faster than his ship, but what struck him most was the people. Humans moved with purpose and confidence he had never seen before. Children played in parks while studying holographic displays of advanced mathematics. Workers operated machinery that bent space and time. Artists created sculptures that existed in multiple dimensions. This was not the violent, disorganized species the Council had feared. This was a civilization that had been forged by necessity into something magnificent and terrible. President Chun led him to the underground command center where humanity had planned its isolation and survival. The main chamber was filled with displays showing the entire galaxy, including real-time tracking of the dark entity's advance. "You've been watching us," Threndy said, staring at the detailed maps of Council space. "We've been watching the galaxy die," Anna replied coldly. "We tried to warn you 50 years ago about what was coming. You chose to ignore us." Dr. Sarah Kim joined them at the central display. Her hair was now completely white, and her face bore the lines of someone who had spent decades preparing for war. "The entities feed on order and predictability," she explained. "Your perfect civilization was a banquet laid out for them." Threndy felt his telepathic abilities recoil from Dr. Kim's mind. There was something there that hurt to touch, a cold hardness that had been forged by years of rejection and isolation. This woman had spent 50 years learning to hate, and her hatred was precise and deadly. "How did you know?" he asked. "Because we've faced chaos before," Anna answered. "We fought wars, survived disasters, adapted to threats you can't imagine. When we saw the darkness approaching, we recognized what it was, something that feeds on easy prey." The displays around them showed the current state of the galaxy. Red zones marked systems that had gone silent. Yellow zones showed areas under attack. Green zones, representing safe space, were shrinking by the day. 70% of the outer rim is gone, Dr. Kim reported with clinical precision. "The entities are moving faster now, learning from each encounter. They'll reach the core worlds within 2 months. Threndy closed his eyes, feeling the weight of galactic extinction on his shoulders. "What do you want from us?" Anna's smile was sharp as a blade. "Everything you denied us for 50 years. Full membership in the Council. Reparations for our forced isolation. Complete autonomy for human space. And most importantly, command authority over any joint defense effort." "Command authority?" Threndy's voice cracked. "You want to lead the Council fleet?" "There is no Council fleet," Dr. Kim said bluntly. "The entities destroyed it at Kepler. What's left of your military is hiding behind defensive lines that won't hold for more than a few weeks." Threndy realized the full scope of humanity's knowledge about the galactic crisis. They had been monitoring everything, tracking every battle, analyzing every failure. While the Council stumbled blindly against an enemy they couldn't understand, humans had been studying and preparing. "You want us to admit we were wrong," Threndy said quietly. "No," Anna replied. "We want you to admit you need us." "There's a difference." President Chun activated a holographic display that showed human ship designs. The vessels looked nothing like traditional galactic technology. They were angular, aggressive, built for war rather than exploration. These ships can partially phase out of normal space, she explained. They can match the entity's dimensional frequency and fight them on their own terms. We've developed weapons that don't just destroy matter, but unravel the quantum foundations of existence itself. Threndy stared at the impossible designs. Such technology should not be possible. Should not be possible according to the peaceful galaxy's understanding of physics, Dr. Kim corrected. We've had 50 years to explore the impossible. We've pushed science beyond what you thought were natural limits. The tour continued through laboratories where human scientists worked on projects that made Threndy's mind real. Weapons that existed in multiple dimensions. Shields that could protect entire solar systems. Engines that could travel faster than the entities themselves, but the most disturbing sight was the training centers where young humans learned to fight beings that existed partially outside reality. Children who should have been playing instead practiced techniques for battling cosmic horror. You've turned your entire civilization into a weapon, Threndy observed. We've turned our civilization into survivors, Anna corrected. The galaxy cast us out for being too chaotic, too unpredictable, too willing to fight. Now those traits are the only things that can save you. That evening, Threndy sat alone in his quarters, preparing the message that would change galactic history. The communication would travel through quantum entanglement to reach the council chambers on Nexus Prime instantly. Honored Council, he began, his voice heavy with the weight of admission. I have met with human leadership. They possess the technology and knowledge necessary to fight the entities. But their terms are significant. He outlined humanity's demands, watching through the quantum link as the council members reacted with shock and outrage. The mechanoids calculated the cost of accepting human terms. The luminari flickered with indignation. The plant-like Verdani rustled with displeasure. They demand complete authority over our defense? Overseer Veltar's voice carried across space, with barely controlled anger. They demand the authority to save us, Threndy replied. And they're the only ones who can do it. The debate that followed lasted for hours. Pride warred with desperation. Dignity fought against extinction. In the end, survival won. Very well, Veltar said finally. Inform the humans that their terms are accepted. Full membership, reparations, autonomy, and command authority. They will lead our defense against the entities. Threndy closed the communication link and walked to his window. Outside, he could see human ships preparing for war. Vessels that could fight the impossible, crewed by beings who had spent 50 years learning to thrive in chaos. The galaxy that had once thought it didn't need humans was about to discover it could not survive without them. The cage had become a forge, and what emerged from it would determine whether the galaxy lived or died. In her command center, President Anna Chun received Threndy's report with grim satisfaction. Patch me through to all human forces, she ordered. This is President Chun, she announced to the network of ships and stations throughout the Sol system. The galaxy has agreed to our terms. We are no longer prisoners. We are no longer outcasts. We are the galaxy's last hope. Around her, the command center erupted in cheers. But Anna's expression remained serious. The real work was just beginning. They had won the right to save the galaxy. Now they had to prove they could do it. The combined fleet gathered in the Magellan Void, a region of empty space between spiral arms where the final battle would be fought. Admiral Marcus Chun stood on the bridge of his flagship, the UES Defiance, watching as ships from across the galaxy took formation around him, but this was not like any fleet the galaxy had ever seen before. Human vessels phased in and out of normal space like ghosts. Council ships flew in protective formations around the strange human technology they did not understand. The Zephyrians provided psychic coordination. The mechanoids contributed their computational power. The Luminari offered energy support. For the first time in galactic history, humans and aliens worked together as equals. But the leadership belonged to humanity, and that made all the difference. Admiral, reported Captain Lisa Park from her position at the science station, we're detecting the entities at the edge of sensor range. They're bigger than before. Much bigger, Marcus nodded grimly. The Devourers had grown stronger with each system they consumed. What had started as entities, the size of ships, were now creatures that dwarfed space stations. They fed on the life force of entire worlds, and each feeding made them more powerful. Dr. Sarah Kim's voice came over the communication channel from her research vessel. Marcus, we've confirmed our theory. The entities exist in quantum flux, partially in our space and partially in what we call the shadow realm. Traditional weapons can't touch them because they're not entirely here. But our weapons can reach them? Marcus asked. Our weapons don't just destroy matter, Sarah replied with grim satisfaction. They unravel the quantum foundations that hold reality together. If we're right, we can hurt these things in ways they've never experienced before. Ambassador Threndy stood on the bridge of his own ship, watching the human preparations with a mixture of awe and terror. The weapons being deployed around him were unlike anything in galactic history. Reality-warping cannons that could tear holes in space itself. Dimensional anchors that could lock entities into normal space where they could be fought. Quantum bombs that could erase targets from existence itself. Are we sure this won't destroy us too? He asked nervously. Marcus heard the question through the open communication channels. No, he replied honestly. But we're sure that doing nothing will definitely destroy us. Sometimes you have to choose between certain death and possible survival. The entities emerged from hyperspace like a living nightmare. Where before they had been individual creatures, now they seemed to be part of something larger. A vast consciousness that stretched across multiple dimensions, feeding on the ordered patterns of galactic civilization. My God, whispered Admiral Cassara from her mechanoid flagship. How many are there? Counting is meaningless, Dr. Kim replied. They're not separate entities anymore. They've become something like a collective organism that exists across dimensional boundaries. The Devourer had indeed evolved. Each world it consumed had taught it more about the galaxy's weaknesses. It had learned to mimic galactic technology, to predict galactic tactics, to feed more efficiently on the ordered minds of peaceful species, but it had never encountered chaos made manifest. It had never faced a species that thrived on unpredictability and improvisation. All ships begin Phase 1, Marcus ordered. The human vessels began to flicker, phasing in and out of normal space in patterns that hurt the mind to watch. They moved in formations that seemed random but were actually carefully calculated chaos. No two ships followed the same path. No attack came from the expected direction. The Devourers tried to respond with their usual tactics. They reached out, with tendrils of darkness that could drain the life from entire fleets. But the tendrils passed through empty space as human ships phased out of reality. Just before contact, energy weapons that had absorbed every previous attack found nothing to absorb. As human vessels fired from dimensions the entities could barely perceive, quantum torpedoes struck the Devourers from angles that should not have existed, tearing wounds in their multidimensional forms. They're confused, reported Dr. Kim with excitement. The collective mind is trying to process our attack. Patterns, but chaos can't be calculated. They don't know how to predict unpredictability. But the Devourers were learning, as they always did. The collective consciousness began to adapt, spreading itself across more dimensions to avoid the human attacks. The battle became a dance of impossible physics as both sides fought across multiple layers of reality. Admiral, called out Captain Park, we're losing ships. The entities are starting to match our dimensional phasing. Marcus saw the truth on his tactical display. Human vessels were beginning to disappear as the Devourers learned to track them across dimensional boundaries. The advantage of surprise was fading, and the entities were simply too large and powerful to defeat through conventional means. Dr. Kim, he said over the communication channel, it's time for the final option. There was a pause before Sarah's voice came back, heavy with the weight of what she was about to say. Marcus, the consciousness transfer protocol is still experimental. The chances of survival are almost zero. The chances of survival if we don't try are exactly zero, Marcus replied. Prepare the system. What happened next would be remembered. As either the greatest sacrifice or the greatest folly in galactic history, Dr. Kim activated a device that existed in her laboratory and on Marcus's flagship simultaneously, a quantum entanglement system that could transfer consciousness across any distance. All ships fall back to minimum safe distance, Marcus ordered. What I'm about to do will either save the galaxy or destroy it, possibly both. Admiral Marcus Chun walked to the center of his bridge, where a strange device hummed with barely contained energy. It looked like a metal chair surrounded by arrays of quantum processors and dimensional anchors. "Admiral, you don't have to do this," Captain Park said quietly. "We can find another way," Marcus smiled at his old friend. 50 years ago, the galaxy cast us out because they thought we were too chaotic for their perfect order. Today, we're going to prove that chaos is exactly what the universe needs to survive. He sat in the chair and activated the consciousness transfer protocol. The device began to tear his mind from his body, converting his thoughts and memories into quantum information that could exist independently of physical form. But this was not just a simple transfer. Dr. Kim had loaded Marcus's consciousness with something the Devourers had never encountered, a virus of pure human creativity and unpredictability. The ability to think in ways that defied logic, to find solutions where none should exist, to embrace chaos as a tool rather than fear it as an enemy. Marcus's consciousness launched itself across space and plunged directly into the collective mind of the Devour. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The entities that had fed on ordered minds for millions of years suddenly found themselves infected with something they could not process or digest. Human creativity spread through their collective consciousness like wildfire, introducing concepts that broke their understanding of reality. The Devourers began to tear themselves apart from within. The collective mind that had consumed galaxies found itself unable to maintain coherence when faced with true chaos. Individual entities began to break away from the collective, confused and weakened, but Marcus was dying in the process. His consciousness, spread across the Devourer collective, was being consumed even as it destroyed them. Through the quantum link, Dr. Kim watched his vital signs fade. "Marcus, get out of there!" she called desperately. "You've done enough damage." "Extract now," but Marcus's voice came back weak and distant. "Can single quotes T dot deep dot, but it's working. They're falling apart. The chaos is spreading through their entire network." Across the battlefield, the impossible happened. The entities that had seemed invincible began to retreat. The collective consciousness that had threatened to devour the galaxy was fragmenting into confused individual creatures that no longer knew how to coordinate their attacks. "They're withdrawing," reported Admiral Cassara with amazement. "All entities are moving away from galactic space." But the victory came at a terrible price. Marcus Chen's consciousness finally faded from the quantum link, his sacrifice complete. The man who had spent 50 years testing the barriers that caged his people had broken the ultimate barrier between life and death to save the galaxy that had rejected him. The Devourers fled beyond the galactic rim, wounded and confused by their first encounter with true chaos. They would return someday, perhaps, but not for thousands of years. And when they did, the galaxy would be ready. In the aftermath of the battle, the surviving fleets gathered in the Magellan Void to honor the fallen and plan for a new future. The barrier around Sol had been permanently dismantled. Humanity was not just free, but recognized as the saviors of galactic civilization. President Anna Chun stood before the reformed Galactic Council, now expanded to include humanity as full members. But she was not the same woman who had negotiated with Ambassador Threndy. The loss of her brother had aged her, but it had also given her a fierce determination to ensure his sacrifice was not wasted. 50 years ago, you told us the galaxy didn't need chaos, she said to the assembled representatives. You were wrong. The galaxy needs chaos too.